Hey, what's going on, everyone? Mr. Cameron here, and today we are talking about two huge events in the 1850s that pushed the United States closer to civil war. The first event that we're going to talk about is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act took place in 1854. The second event that we're going to talk about is the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision. The Dred Scott decision took place in 1857. I'm going to take you through both of these events, why they're important, what happened, and how it pushed the United States closer to civil war. So if you are one of my at-home learners, follow along with me. I will take you through exactly what you need to know. We'll hit the highlights, and you'll know exactly what needs to be done for my class. So let's go ahead, as always, and start with Microsoft Teams. If you are at home and you are following along with me, as always, you're going to find your class period, whatever it is. I'm going to work in the test team because that's just what I've come to do to make sure we maintain everyone's privacy. Go to your team, go to Notebook, click on the little arrow, and then you'll find your name here. Now, if you click on your name, you'll see that I have added two new handouts in the class note folder. So we've already done a dividing nation, we've done Missouri Compromise, we've done the Compromise of 1850. Now we are moving on to the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision. So for this video, I'm going to work in the OneNote app, which I've said before I really like. And if you have an opportunity to download the app, I would highly recommend you do that. It's very user-friendly. But for this video, to make things a little bit easier, I'll go ahead and use the app so that way I can highlight anything that you need to know. So first thing, if we're looking at the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, we need to figure out what exactly the Kansas-Nebraska Act is, and how did the addition of these two future states, right now they're territories, how did this nearly bring a nation to war? Well, one of the people that played a huge role in this is a senator by the name of Stephen Douglass. Stephen Douglass is a senator from Illinois. Stephen Douglass will later become famous for his debates with President Lincoln, and he is the main creator of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And basically what this act does is it organizes the territories of Kansas and Nebraska, and they're trying to figure out what exactly should be allowed and should not be allowed in these territories. And when we're talking about what should be allowed and what should not be allowed, of course, we're talking about the biggest issue of the century, and certainly the biggest issue of that time period, and that would be slavery. And one of the things that they tried to establish in these territories is this principle, this idea of popular sovereignty. Now, we talked about this in class a little bit. Popular sovereignty is basically a fancy way of saying, let the voters decide. And when we say voters, and we're talking about the 1850s, we're talking about white residents of the territory. So people like Stephen Douglass, when they're establishing these new territories of Kansas and Nebraska, their idea is to let the white voters in those territories decide whether or not to allow slavery. Now, of course, one of the big things with this act is it's going to get rid of the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Because if you remember from our previous class, the Missouri Compromise established this line, and it said that no slavery was allowed north of the line, but slavery was allowed south of the line. So if we're letting these two new territories decide whether or not to allow slavery, we've basically done away with this compromise that they created in 1820. And as I mentioned to you in class, none of these compromises actually solve the issue. All it does is take the problem of slavery and just push it to the side for about 30 or 40 years. So what I want you to do, as always, is read through this overview. I'm going to take you through it, but I want you to read through it as well, just to get a better idea of what exactly is happening with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So as I mentioned, the act is going to repeal the Missouri Compromise, and this has the possibility to open up slavery in the West. As with most of these events that we're talking about, this passage, the passage of the act, is going to further divide the country along sectional lines. What that means is Northerners and Southerners who already are not getting along are going to get even more angry with one another, and it's going to further divide the country. And one of the problems with popular sovereignty, and I will switch highlighter colors here to kind of emphasize the point. Let's go with a nice yellow here. One of the problems is that when you let people vote, both sides, pro-slavery and anti-slavery, are going to go into the territories in order to increase their own numbers. That was a highlighter fail right there. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and highlight it all because it's very important. So again, the pro-slavery and the anti-slavery forces are going to send people into those territories to increase their numbers. And their hope is if they get more pro-slavery people in Kansas, they'll win the vote and slavery will be allowed. Of course, the anti-slavery people are thinking if we get more anti-slavery people into Kansas, we'll have more people, we'll win the vote, slavery will not be allowed there. But this eventually becomes known as Bleeding Kansas because, as you can imagine, if you have large groups of people in a territory together and they have extremely different views on a very hot issue, violence is going to occur, and this is exactly what happens. One of the people that we'll talk about a little bit later that plays a huge role in Kansas is a guy named John Brown. And John Brown is an abolitionist who wants to get rid of slavery, but he believes the best way to get rid of slavery is through violence. So he'll play a role in Kansas, and then he'll play an even bigger role shortly in the future. So after you guys read through the overview, what I want you to do is take a look at this map. Okay, let's see if I can improve in my highlighter skills here. So this is a Kansas-Nebraska Act map from 1854. As you can see, you have the Nebraska territory right here. You've got the Kansas territory right here. And this act essentially does away with the Missouri Compromise because if you remember, there was a line drawn right around there that said anything north of that line, slavery was not allowed. It allowed slavery south of that line, but in 1854, this act will completely undo the Missouri Compromise line. So after taking a look at the map, you're going to come down here and you're going to watch this TED Ed video on how one piece of legislation divided a nation. After that, we're going to come down and we're going to read some primary sources. And what primary sources are, those are sources that were actually from the time period. So the first one you're going to read is a newspaper article from May 1854. Now, I understand when you're reading old documents, especially from 1854, they may be hard to read, they may be hard to understand. So I would encourage you to use the immersive reader feature in the class notebook to help you better understand what you're reading. And if you're not sure how to do that, I put a video previously onto my YouTube page that goes over all that. So after you're done reading this news article right here, you're going to answer this question. What should Southerners do to make Kansas a slave territory? And one of the words that you want to keep in mind is the word immigrate that they'll use. And that's when you leave one country or territory to settle in another country or territory. After that, you're going to read a letter from June of 1855 in which Mr. J. Locke Hardiman is going to be advocating certain things to a friend. That's what I want you to try to figure out. And I've put some hopefully helpful teacher tips in here, which I've put in red print, in red font here, to help you better understand the reading. Again, this is not graded. This is just a way for you to start reading old documents, hopefully understanding old documents, and we'll go over these, and I'm trying to give you a little bit of a hint or a heads up right now to better prepare you as we start looking at these old documents. So after you read through the second primary source or you listen to it in immersive reader, go ahead and answer these questions. And then there's one final question down there at the end, and then that's all you have to do for the Kansas-Nebraska Act handout. Okay? Once you're done with that, you'll move on to the Dred Scott decision. Now, the Dred Scott decision, when we say decision, we're talking about a Supreme Court decision. So if you remember from last year, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the country. What they say must be followed by all states. So the decision that they make regarding this man right here, Dred Scott, is going to have far-reaching implications for the entire United States. So the questions that we need to look at here are, let's switch up our colors. The questions we need to look at: who was Dred Scott and why are we still talking about him today? And how did his case contribute to the already rising racial tensions in America? So as we've talked about, slavery is the issue of the day. You've got your pro-slavery forces, you've got your anti-slavery forces, you've got your abolitionists, some who want to abolish slavery through peaceful means and legal means, some who want to abolish slavery through violence. Racial tension is rampant in the United States in the 1850s, and this case will only contribute to that tension. So after you take a look at these two big questions here, there's a video to watch that gives you basically an overview of the case. Okay, and the overview, which I'll try to give you here shortly, is Dred Scott was a slave, but Dred Scott was taken into a territory and a state where slavery was abolished, where slavery was not allowed. So Dred Scott will eventually sue or attempt to sue for his freedom, stating that when he lived in that free state, he therefore should have been free. And the video will go over it more in depth, but I wanted to at least give you a general overview here. But some of the key points to take away. And Dred Scott's case will eventually make its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that slaves were not considered citizens under the Constitution. So just let that sink in for a minute, because hopefully you're sitting there thinking, that's crazy. How could you ever make that decision? Well, we're in the 1850s, and this is what the Supreme Court decided. They ruled that since Dred Scott was not a citizen, he had no legal rights and therefore could not sue for his freedom. They also ruled that the 1820 Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, meaning it went against the Constitution. And they also ruled that individual states do not have the authority to grant citizenship to the United States. Only the federal or national government can do that. So after watching the video and reading through the highlights of the case, or lowlights of the case, you're going to go down and you're going to fill out this brief Microsoft form. Once you're done with the Microsoft form, you're going to read a letter from one of the most famous abolitionists and one of the most famous Americans of all time, a man by the name of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass, of course, was an abolitionist. He was a women's rights activist, and he was a freed slave. And you may, again, want to use the immersive reader here when you're reading the primary source, but this is a letter that I have condensed to make it a little bit easier to understand, but this is a letter that Frederick Douglass actually wrote to the Supreme Court, and this is one that he wrote in response to the decision by the Supreme Court, and the man in particular is Chief Justice Roger B. Taney. So after you read his response, I want you to write a one-paragraph letter to Chief Justice Taney of the Supreme Court, and I want you to explain to him why you believe that the Dred Scott decision was wrong, and why the Supreme Court has now further set the country on the path to war. This should be persuasive. You should use emphatic language, meaning you should write with passion. You should write from the heart, but you should also use facts and things that we've studied in class to back up your letter. Okay, so just like Dred Scott was really, his case was a travesty of justice. So just like the decision that they made was the wrong decision, and Frederick Douglass spoke out about it, I want you to speak out about it with a one-paragraph persuasive, not even an essay because it's not even that long, but just one paragraph. So hopefully you all know what I want you to do. I want you to go through the Kansas-Nebraska Act. As always, do the readings, watch the videos, complete any questions that there are, and then when you're done, same thing for the Dred Scott decision. Go through, watch the video, do all the readings, complete the form, and then don't forget your one paragraph down at the bottom. Hopefully this provides some insight and allows you to know exactly what I'm looking for. These two handouts we're going to be doing over the next 2 days. So to finish the week off and to finish the week off strong, we're going to look at the Kansas-Nebraska Act and the Dred Scott decision. As always, if you have questions, you can send me a message in chat through Microsoft Teams, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Next week, we're going to be finishing up this dividing nation chapter, and we're going to actually start moving into the Civil War. But it's important for us to know why the country has so much tension, why the North and the South are fighting against each other, and why the country in the United States is slowly moving on this path to civil war. Hopefully this provides some insight. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of why the Civil War actually happens. But next week, as I said, we'll be looking at the Civil War, how it was fought, who were some of the leaders, what a soldier's daily life was like, what impact it had on civilians, and then we'll move on from there. All right, guys, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to me. And as always, I look forward to seeing you guys both in person and online in the days and weeks ahead. All right, guys, thanks.